Okay, I'm going to ask all of our wonderful speakers to put on their video now. I feel I've been on a little bit of an emotional roller coaster. I started with incredible optimism, then concern about air quality, back to optimism, and then ended on total despair. So I'm not sure how the next 20 minutes are going to go. We only have until 3:15 for an amazing number of brilliant questions. I've tried to group them a little, and I'm going to direct them to the speakers, but if any of the other panelists want to add, if they can lift their hand metaphorically or literally, that would be brilliant. So I'm going to start with Ian, and there were a couple of questions on this theme, which was, what has been or could be the impact of the research you were talking about, plant and or bugs on COVID and the medium-term COVID response?
Thank you, Rachel. So COVID, as well as getting vaccines, there are a number of new medicines, as people will know. Dexamethasone is one that's a treatment for the actual virus itself. And those same small molecule natural products that I've talked about, a number of those do have activity against viruses. We've worked on some of them. We have done some screening against viruses over the last couple of years. We haven't found a blockbuster small molecule for COVID, unfortunately, but it's it's right there in the frame that small molecule natural products can lead to really effective drugs, including drugs against viruses such as coronaviruses. And it's I think as there will now be a new emphasis post-COVID on having a pipeline of products, then it's really important that that type of work goes on. Indeed, last year, 2020, no, not last year now, I, along with a number of scientists from botanical gardens around the world, published a short letter in Science emphasizing the need to start using those amazing resources that we have. So we have a pipeline that's producing those treatments that will be needed when the next epidemic or pandemic comes along, and not just waiting until it starts before we start doing this type of work.
Ian, one other question for you. You said in your talk that biodiversity was one of the prerequisites for this kind of research. Do you think that there is more we as a country or as a planet need to do on this? And if so, what?
Yes, that's another very good question. So one of the other things that I'm a trustee of Kew, Royal Botanic Gardens Kew, and so they are very, very active on biodiversity. Obviously, their main mission is to stop this massive problem that we have with biodiversity loss. It's the other side of the coin, as you've heard in the last talk as well, from climate, along with climate change. And one of the first things we need to do is identify all of the species that are out there. And they're in fact, Kew are foremost in doing this. It's not something that we're really focused on in York, but it's something I'm really committed to recognizing the value of and recognizing the need for scientists to get involved in it. And so characterizing new species and then characterizing the compounds that are in those new species and conducting research on libraries of those compounds is something that we are doing in York. In fact, we're just currently establishing a new library of molecules that our biomedical colleagues in York are then screening against a whole range of diseases and cancers. And so it's something that we're doing, but it all starts fighting against biodiversity loss. A lot of it still starts by carefully characterizing the species that are out there, because until we know what's out there, we don't know if we're losing it. And the big highlight, if you've seen it in the last week or so, was that there's been a new species of tree from Africa that's been named after Leonardo DiCaprio because of his excellent work that he's done in conservation and as an active environmentalist. So it's that type of work which I think is really, really important.
Feels appropriate given he just appeared in Don't Look Up, doesn't it? The timing. So I'm going to move on to Nicola. I did find your talk a little worrying as one of the people who thought that air quality was one of the few bright spots and upsides of the last few years. First question from someone is, how big of a problem is this? How many premature deaths and serious health conditions are being caused by unnecessary, for want of a better word, indoor air pollution?
I don't think anybody really knows at the moment. So what happens is that the UK government has means of calculating the number of mortalities every year from air pollution, but that really is based on concentrations measured by these outdoor air quality monitors. And then they make assumptions that if you live near to an air quality monitor a few streets away, that represents your exposure. Now, the problem is we know that that's only looking at part of the story. So I think at the moment that's a big unknown, and another really good reason why we need to understand more about indoor air quality, what the pollutants are, what the concentrations are, how we're exposed, before we can properly answer that question.
And your answer to this may therefore be the same. One of the questions was, if these are such big problems, why don't we regulate them more rather than relying on human behavior to change, which often we wait a long time for? Why is the government not more active in regulating out some of these problems?
Yeah, I think that is coming, actually. So just before Christmas, I think one of the issues, it's the same for outdoor air quality to some extent, but it's more of a problem for indoor air quality, is that these sorts of issues go across lots of government departments. So you can think of, you've got housing in there, you've got things like the impact of transport from outdoors, you've got things like the products we use in our homes. So there's lots of different parts of government that are involved. So before Christmas, there was a commitment made to try and bring people from across the relevant government departments to start thinking about indoor air quality. And that's really important now, because the government have this big drive on building new houses. And one of the things that's going to happen because of the climate emergency is we're going to try and make them all very airtight so we don't waste energy. But what we don't want to do is to commit future generations to very poor air quality in their homes. They haven't got sufficient ventilation. So it's a very well-timed intervention putting this group together.
Do you remember this with building schools for the future? If any of you remember that they built some schools so airtight that all the students ended up falling asleep in the middle of the lessons.
Yeah.
Peter, I'm just going to come to you next. I thought your talk was fascinating because I spent a lot of my life involved in what is still called levelling up policy and thinking about the future of the high street. And if I understood what you were saying, this is one of the reimaginings of what places could look like. What is standing in the way? Is your talk about things that are just going to happen and we should wait for them? Or are there barriers in the way?
I don't think there's any civil barriers in that. There's no one stopping people putting machines in the high street and so forth. I think maybe we're not quite ready for it as consumers to be able to walk in and ask for something to be made, go and have a meal and come back and it's there, or have it instantly made. I think there's so many things that are coming together that machines are coming smaller. I mean, we can print things at home now, as in not just photographs, physical three-dimensional things. So I think as there's rapid developments in digital and rapid developments in tools and people looking at how to serve people with not necessarily products of the future, but services of the future, using products, because increasingly we don't have a requirement to own things anymore. So maybe as generations change and priorities change, that people are much more interested in having a service of something rather than owning something, and maybe that will help. So I think it's lots of things coming together, that things getting smaller and cleaner, technology getting better, but also just the way we want to interact. So I don't think there's anything physically in the centre stopping us, and there's empty spaces for us. So I think it's more of it could come, I think.
And obviously York is not only a place where great research is done, it's also a place that educates people. And I think there are some people still at school who are watching these talks. When we talk about automation changing technology, we usually get on to changing jobs. Is there anything you think this means for them, for the students you're teaching now, or for people who are still at school and thinking about their future?
I could take this off in two different directions. One is the developments of digital are going to make some of the jobs that we have grown up with obsolete, as computers do some of the repetitive tasks. But there's so much data out there that says there's new jobs going to be created because of the new opportunities. But also, if we do go down a route where there's opportunities in high streets to make things for people, it might be that a lot of these businesses are smaller. And maybe I have a biased and blinkered view, but I think the generation coming through now is much more entrepreneurial, much more risky, and much more adventurous, and wanting to try out their own businesses. So it might be that those in very early in their careers at the moment might be those risk takers. When we see lots of entrepreneurs developing things at York already.
Don't join a company, start something yourself? Is that the
yes,
message?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
So yeah, they make their own jobs rather than educate for them. Or they educate themselves, but they make their own jobs rather than get them from other people.
And Ada, I'm going to come to you. Lots of questions about your fascinating talk. A couple have asked a sort of, again, similar thing, which is we hear a lot about governments planting trees in their own country. And we also hear a lot about companies offsetting through forestation of some kind. Is this likely to make any difference and counteract some of the things that you've found?
So it's a very good question. So let me start for the very beginning. So when you plant trees, they grow slowly. If you are in the tropics, if there's no cold winter or not very dry summer, they grow a little bit more. But I think we haven't, as scientists, transferred the message that it's very different to save a rainforest, where on average, just to give you a figure, there's about 300 tons of carbon per hectare. When you plant the forest in the rainforest area where they grow the whole year round, you may get 50. So no matter how many trees you plant, and you should plant them in the areas where they grow faster, it still makes it takes a lot more space to make up for the rainforest that you're losing because of these big trees and so on. So don't get me wrong, planting trees is good in some cases, in some locations, and they provide all the services, not just the carbon. But to fight climate change, we need to save the rainforest first. That's the first step. I think that's an imperative.
And on that, someone's pointed to the 2030 pledges that Brazil and other countries have signed up to in terms of ending deforestation. When you look under the hood of those pledges, are they enough? Do they begin to be enough? What's still missing? Where are we?
I think I would even start with, will they ever be implemented? Because we've seen pledges before, and in some, maybe in Brazil, they're a little bit more powerful, but I work in the Congo Basin, and these governments actually have the means to stop deforestation, to stop corruption, to stop all the illegal activities that we don't even quantify properly. I think it is difficult. So of course, if it happens, it would help, because as I said, even if the tropical forests are losing their ability or they're being more affected by climate change to absorb carbon, of course, the more we have, the better for us. So it would help. But I think it's still, we need to acknowledge that our tropical forests are not as healthy as we thought that they would be in the coming decades. Not just in terms of extent, but on the way they function. So that's why we need to be extra careful on the deforestation issues than we ever thought, in a way.
So, I mean, are you wholly pessimistic? We have governments that face major internal political pressures, as well as not necessarily functioning that well themselves. Pledges you think may not be implemented. A situation that is much worse than you thought before you started the study. Are there any chinks of light you want to leave us with?
I mean, I think to me, I am a positive person in general, and I think there's two messages here. There's one, we agreed as a kind of governments agreed before to help fight the hole in the ozone layer, as we say. So I think there's not many, but there are examples where our society came together to make regulations and implement them both to actually make big change towards our planet. So I think there is hope on a way. It could happen again. Of course, there's many interests, but I think it could happen. And the other one is that we also have more means now, right? I mean, our consumers through the social media and other ways, or maybe just they have more access to information. In a way, they're becoming increasingly more aware about the environment and what it means, that the fact that we are all connected and so on. So I think there'll be change. I mean, hopefully it will come sooner than, or the sooner we can, but I think it will happen. It's just a matter of, joining efforts, if it makes sense.
So I suppose that leads me to what I'm going to leave as the final question for each of our panelists, because I've been told I must finish on time or face serious repercussions, which is, if you wanted to leave people watching with one final message, which may be change one thing, or it may be remember one thing, what would it be? What would you like us to do and or remember most as a result of your talks? And I'm going to go in reverse order. Aida, so I'm going to go to you first, because you talk about consumer change.
Yeah, for me, I think it's just make wise choices on your consumption patterns. And this applies not just to food, but the way you live, the way you heat your house, the way you maybe contributed to your own in-house indoor pollution, as Nicola showed. So just think, I mean, maybe not all the time, but at least sometimes reflect on what you're doing, because this can have a big impact.
And Peter, it's like a tricky question for you in many ways.
It's not, because I'm going to copy Aida and say, make wise choices, because if you look at companies that you buy from, you can very quickly tell how concerned they are about the environment and about the social agenda and how well they govern themselves. So make wise choices of who you buy from, and vote with your feet and your wallets and purses to make sure that you're sending the money in the right direction. But maybe to remember the other side of your question, what can you remember, is about there's opportunities. So things that are on a decline maybe aren't always on a decline, but so we might see town centres as possibly declining, but there are also opportunities. So I'll leave that message.
And thank you for lifting us up again. And Nicola.
Yep, I think I would just say, just like to highlight the importance of ventilation. So we're all equipped with a really sensitive detector for air pollution, which is this. So if you can smell something in your home, fragrances or cooking smells or other odours, open the windows. Very simple solution that will help a lot.
Thank you. And Ian.
Thank you. So I would like to continue in that theme of wise choices. And, you know, it's the last 100 years that we've really messed up the planet. And, you know, for the thousands of years before that, we've relied on what we now call nature-based solutions. And I gave you some examples of those for medicines, but there's, you know, nature-based solutions for just about everything. And we need to return to those nature-based solutions to get out of the mess that we're in. And so when you're making those wise choices, just think about, you know, what are the nature-based solutions that we need to be using to really get back to reducing the loss of biodiversity and reversing the impact of climate change. So the future is nature-based solutions.
Thank you. I just want to finish by saying how fabulous I found today. I spend most of my life in Westminster, which does not feel like the most optimistic and solution-based place right now. And it is thrilling to be reminded that there are lots of people changing the world. And I really did find it exciting and very inspiring. There were so many questions I did not have time to get to. I know the panelists have very kindly offered to reply to them offline. And thank you for being such an engaged audience and asking so many questions. I know that you will want to join the final session of York Talks today at 3:45 and also hear the announcement of the winners for the PhD Spotlight competition if you're able to tear yourself away from the session for 3 minutes to go and vote. The voting has now closed, it's too late, but do have a look at the online gallery and the winners. And I'd just like to say thank you again to the brilliant speakers and the talks. I learnt an enormous amount today. I hope you all have a great and I hope COVID-free evening and enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you so much again. Goodbye.